Hi, friend.
Hi, friend.
And to the brave hearts listening out there, welcome to Permission to be Human. I'm Andrea.
And I'm Janelle.
Get ready for some real-time relationship woo and wisdom
from the front lines with occasional tantrums and tears
about how breaking rules, blurring boundaries, and tossing tradition can be catalysts for finding your truth.
Let's debunk the fairy tales we were told as children and create a new map for life.
Yes, Disney can go fuck itself.
If you're seeking permission to choose your own path,
freedom is the new F word, people,
and want to feel less alone along the way,
we got you.
Please note, this is our side of the story. Our partners and metamors have their own individual experiences, and we do not speak for them.
Well, here we are. It's been a couple of weeks since we've seen each other.
Yes. Hello. Sinking into fall right now. Communication is what we're talking about today.
And we're really talking about how we both thought we were really good communicators until we figured out that we were not.
Yeah, I'm not going to say like I was a bad communicator. I think that, I'm not going to quite go that far. Maybe you would, but I don't think I was a bad communicator, but there's a nuance to communication and different tools that really enhance that clarify, that reduce misunderstanding, that talking less can actually mean saying more. There's so much of that. But at the same time, I would say that I think I had good communication skills before too, or else I wouldn't have gotten this far in life.
Yeah. And maybe what it is that I feel like I was really good at asking questions. I was like really, really good at some and just really non-existent in the others. And so now I feel there's more of a balance. I have more skills and I'm balanced more with all of them.
Yeah, that makes sense. And and a note on asking questions. Yeah, there's that. I think you've helped me come to a good place with that. It's important to ask questions. And what I've learned about asking questions is if you're interrupting the flow of a story, then the question is not a good idea. Even though I'm wanting more and I'm wanting people to paint the picture, questions interrupt the vibe and the flow and the feeling that's occurring when a story is happening.
So it's interrupting is really what I'm hearing.
Yes, it's too much of an interruption. And I'm always curious. Mm-hmm. And I think for a long time I was around my husband who was like the opposite. He's like, you sound like a detective. He has said that to me before. Probably just once, but he's just like, no. And I'm like, I'm just interested. I'm just curious about this person's, what they're saying. I'm not even going to say anything else he said. I don't remember. But I think his implication was that it's just too much.
Right. I also remember someone saying like, it's like an interrogation.
Right.
That you're just asking so many questions and almost with like an energy behind it, instead of like letting them go at their pace, I'm like demanding a certain response of sort. I want the story to either not necessarily go a certain way, but I want it to be shared in a certain type of energy. Or
what you're indicating there is probably a form of control. Like, oh, no, I'm controlling this situation. I'm asking, I want to know this. I want to know this. I want to know this. What does he or she want to tell? Mm-hmm. And what wants to flow out is the bigger question.
And I would say, like, why are we even talking about this? Maybe it's for our brave hearts. Like, where did this conversation stem from? And I remember when my former husband and I were discussing like what's like the foundation for a relationship, communication was what we agreed upon. So I'm really grateful to him because I said communication thinking I was a good communicator. And then all the skills we're going to talk about today, I've learned because I was in relationship to him. And he knew a lot of these. We practiced a lot of these. But I had to learn. And it was really, really hard to learn these skills.
Can you give me an example?
Well, I was an extrovert who talked a lot and had no problem talking to anyone.
You had no problem talking to anyone.
Talking to anyone wasn't anything that brought nervousness up in my system. So I used to equate that to being a good communicator because I was comfortable talking.
Yeah. Yep. I can relate. Yes.
And then through him, what I also learned was that I also interrupted a lot. And it's still an ongoing practice with him, which is that I see how I have an energy of like, oh, but like I have something to say right now. And that interrupting for someone who is a non-interrupter is really intrusive and doesn't give them an opportunity to, as you just said, share however and whatever they want to share.
Yeah. So I think we dove into interrupting without realizing it, which is great. And I remember Elizabeth Gilbert in Eat, Pray, Love, I think she said, interrupting is basically saying what I have to say is more important than what you have to say. And that when you interrupt, it's often egocentric in that it's like, oh, I want to make a connection. I need the connection. Please give me this connection instead of just receiving.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. There's also something like how I grew up, because it feels like interrupting was part of my dynamic. That's where I was kind of starting with this. I would say my friend group and my family, like if you were at a dinner table, like everyone's talking and everyone has something to say. And really, is there a story being shared? Not necessarily, because we're almost like talking over each other and interrupting each other. And there was a lot of laughing. There was an ease and comfort to being together. But if the point of the conversation was like, oh, let's really try to understand someone and like get deep into like where they were coming from, like that wasn't the type of communication we were doing. It was very fast, rapid fire. And what you were saying is one person speaks and then they're thinking about, oh, what's my reference point? What can I say? What can I say? And if there was someone at the table who was not brought up with that type of communication style, then it was very difficult for them to get like a word in edgewise. Because if they were waiting for a pause in the conversation, a pause never happened.
Right. And this gets into communication styles as well, though. Some people talk and then wait, and some people volley. So I think there can be a good conversation with a volley if you're on the same page and if you have the same style, maybe with two people, you and I.
Of course, we can do that together because we're similar styles and there's just two of us. If there was two of us, and now if you had 6 of people like us, that would be a pretty chaotic conversation.
Yeah. So that was your early family experience of communication, and it didn't change until you met your ex-partner?
Because I would say that my way of communicating, no one questioned it before that. No one said, hey, I don't understand you. No one said you're interrupting. Oh, how's your listening skills? Like none of that was on my radar at all until this relationship. You know, my background, like this was my first serious relationship. I was single or like in short-term relationships for most of my 20s and 30s. So until you have someone that you're with that you really care about, that you really want to understand them and you really want them to understand you and you're different, then I think that's what like brings this as a topic up to the surface. Prior to that, with all my girlfriends, we're probably girlfriends because we have a similar style in some ways.
Yeah, I had the same experience. I started to change, or at least be cognizant of it, when I got married. And I was also like, our conversation styles are so different. I didn't take that to mean that I needed to improve. It was just like, oh, we're never going to be the same. And so I think it wasn't until later that I was like, oh, I need to work on this. This is something that potentially I need to change. I remember at some point thinking as I was socializing with people, say at a party or in a group, that I noticed that basically we all just took turns talking. And I called this as like the soliloquy effect. Just coming out and saying, oh, I've got a story about that. And then they tell their whole story. And then someone else says, oh, I have a story about that too. And then they tell their whole story. And so it's just like people taking turns giving speeches, right? Which is just so not a conversation. And I remember at one of the parent get-togethers, which I may have mentioned before, you know, we were drinking and we weren't drunk, but we were a little bit buzzed sitting around and like with 5 or 6 people. And we had stumbled onto an existential topic. And there was someone in the group that was just I just call them the ball hog, right? They're just like hogging all the time or the airspace. They're not self-aware enough to know they're talking too much, and they just go on and on and on. And as I even talk about these people, I can feel the like trigger. It's so hard. And so my husband just said, you know what, we're each going to take turns now. I would like to know what each and every one of you think about this, and just facilitated a circle of taking turns on the topic. And it was so awesome. I could tell that everyone appreciated it.
Including the ball hog?
He was fine. Didn't really matter. I actually often long for people to jump in and do that now.
To facilitate the cadence of a conversation or storytelling
But it's also part of why I'm not attracted to, I don't want to have a conversation in a group. It feels so unnourishing to me. I'm just getting like a top layer of everyone, and I really just want to get a deep layer of one person.
Is that new for you?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, in the last 5 years. But yeah, I used to love to go to parties, and I really don't anymore.
Because essentially what you're saying is that like the small talk, when you're saying like lots of people at a light layer is not that interesting, or AKA small talk is much less interesting than just having one person and getting the chance to go deep with them.
Yes, but I would further nuance that in saying that there's small talk, and then there's medium talk, where you're in a group and yeah, you're kind of talking about something, but everyone, it's not really coordinated, and there's typically a couple of introverts and 3 extroverts, and you're still not going that deep.
Got it. So the topic could be interesting. It could be like a deep topic, but you don't have a chance to go deep in how everyone feels about it.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So on that note of introverts versus extroverts.
Yes. So Angie and I were both married to introverts. So I read a book, Susan Cain's Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking.
She's talking about us.
She's talking about us. And so reading a book, it was so illuminating, so illuminating on so many levels. So I highly recommend it, regardless if you're an extrovert or an introvert, because I think you will learn a lot about yourself and then how others can perceive you. But the book pointed out a couple of things that really have stayed with me. One is that in general, her opinion is that introverts are actually better communicators than extroverts, because the quality of a really good communicator is very good listening skills. And an introvert is often listening. And then on a cultural and societal level, she has a whole chapter about people who go to Harvard Business School. And there is a type of Harvard Business School student who is considered, oh, they're going to be successful. They're like the charismatic, outgoing, extroverted leader type. And yet she actually shows in study after study that leaders who are introverts and who talk the least in the room are the ones who are perceived to be better leaders and often get a better outcome.
Wow, it's pretty hard evidence.
Yes. But anyway, highly, highly, highly recommend the book.
What do you think is the relationship between external and internal processing and extroversion and introversion?
I actually think they're two different things.
I think they're two different things, but what is the relationship?
I don't think an introvert is automatically an internal processor, and I don't think an extrovert has to be an external processor. So I think that introversion and extroversion, which is how do we get our energy, like how are we sourced from people, is different than are we internal or external processors. I don't see a relationship between those things.
In my experience, I can think of 2 people who are definitely internal processors and definitely introverts. But that's just a couple of anecdotal experiences. So I think I'm just trying to support your point that they're listening, and you're saying they're better communicators because they're good listeners. And I think they're internally processed. I mean, these 2 people I'm thinking of are internally processing and waiting until they have just the right sentence to say, or a very clear sentence to say, and then speaking that. Perhaps it's just a separate point that internal processors may be better communicators because they are not externally processing all of their thoughts and saying them out loud and like working out what they're going to say. They're like thinking about it internally, and then they're arriving somewhere where I'm like talking out my thoughts as I'm thinking them. So I'm putting a lot more into the air that makes it a little messier.
maybe, except that I think the awareness of myself now that I'm doing that is I'm able to bring that into a conversation with someone to say, I just need to talk this out loud right now and like process this right now. Sure. So like, I'm just going to say a bunch of things, but this isn't my final statement on it. So in that way, I feel like I'm communicating my awareness about how I do it. My goal isn't to become an internal processor. Like, I don't think that that's a goal. Is internal processing better than external processing? I don't see that.
Yeah, I also don't see that. Plenty of people aren't aware that they're external processing. So if you're in a situation with someone who's intimate, who you're intimate with or having a deep conversation, you can say, hey, I need to talk this out. Mm-hmm. Sure. But on a regular basis, if you're discussing where to go to a restaurant or something, for a lot of people who may not be as self-aware, like they're just putting things out there as they're talking. I guess I'm thinking that that's not a great form of communication. And so I don't want to change. I'm an external processor. I process things externally, but I think I could probably cut down on that external processing in times when it's not that important.
I'm seeing what you're saying now. Yeah, I think there's a lot of noise that someone who talks a lot can say. But actually that to me is different than processing. Oh, where are we going to go to dinner? Oh, let me like spend 15 minutes processing that. Like that to me is not, that's just like, you're saying a lot of words about a topic that's not relevant.
And so we're defining external processing, and I'm defining it in a broader way than you are. You're talking about processing like a big thing. And I'm like, no, just processing general conversation, like a simple decision.
Yeah, maybe you're talking about decision making.
Yes, exactly.
I agree that I have worked to reduce the amount of words that I say to convey a point when I'm at the point of conveying the point. I do know that I add a lot of filler words. Not even like the uhs and so's, but just like a whole sentence, as we now know from recording a podcast, how many sentences we say that don't actually have any content in them.
Correct. Okay, should we go into apologies?
Sure.
This is just something that it's what spurred this episode for me. I remember being abroad and when I was in the Peace Corps in Bulgaria, customer service in different countries varies and for different reasons. But I remember going into a restaurant and asking, I'm like, oh, do you have a patio? And expecting them or wanting them to say, if they didn't, like, oh no, sorry, we don't. Like, there's this great place down the street that has one. That was like kind of what I was hoping they would respond with. And in this culture, they just look at me and say no, and they walk away. So this inspired a blog for me about apologies. It's like, oh, I'm craving this apology, but why do they need to say sorry, right? Is this craving for apology too much? Like, why do I need someone to say I'm sorry? And then exploring the American culture and thinking, do we say sorry too much? And wondering if we did. And I think there is a lot of, I think there's plenty of rhetoric around women apologizing too much, saying, oh, sorry, I'm just going to jump in here. And so, of course, that is in the culture as well. I think it's probably diluting the word or diluting the apology if it's offered too often.
It's reminding me of like the word love or the word snow, right? Where like, oh, there's like, it's the same word for so many different things. And I would say what I have learned as far as communication goes and communication style differences is that I'm also someone who just loves like, oh, I'm sorry, blah, blah, blah. And so I've worked on really reducing it until it has significance. And what I have also learned is there's types of people where an apology is not what they want at all. There's a distrust that happens when the apology comes because it's like they're not feeling seen because they're like, I don't need your sorry, I need you to do it correctly, right? Like, it's like, you're not listening to me. So apologizing for not listening for not doing it isn't helping the situation. I've had to navigate that with a couple of people. But the point is if it's not being corrected, right? So like every time like you say sorry, they're like, you're really good at saying sorry, but I really don't want your sorry. I want the behavior to change.
Yeah, no, that's true. And this is where we get into just like, what is the meaning of an apology, which gets into really poor patterns. If someone's just doing something over and over and always saying they're sorry and saying, okay, well, that fixes it. Well, no, it doesn't. The idea is we want to evolve.
And my experience is like, oh, I actually really wanted to evolve. And I still wasn't doing it to the level that didn't warrant the apology. And so It was a doozy.
I remember when my daughter was little, not little, but like say she was 6 or 7, and wanting to teach her like that she needed to apologize when she did something wrong, and wanting it and not getting it and thinking, well, how old does she need to be? Or when should I make her do this? And at the time, my therapist husband reminded me, like, Andrea, most people are not good at apologizing. Massive percentage of people really suck at it. They're not going to do it. It's not going to happen. You need to lower your expectations in general.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. That was the message I got from him. Just, it's great. You should work on it, but don't expect it to happen, especially not in a 7-year-old. And I think most of my relationship with my family, I'm quick to apologize. And so when they forget something or do something wrong, I want them to apologize too. To me, it's like acknowledging that, like, oh yeah, I forgot that. Even if it's not a big deal. To me, that felt important. And I think the more I wanted it, the more my husband rejected it. Was like, nope, I'm not apologizing. Nope, not apologizing. And then it just would piss me off more. And then we would just be in this constant tense battle of that. I'll admit that, like, I think I'm good at apologizing about little things, but then when we're in a big fight, I'm actually much better now. But for years, I sucked at it, and he was the one that would come forward and apologize. Isn't that funny? Not funny, really, at the time, but
sorry.
Oh, so yeah, sorry, not sorry. It's kind of a thing now, right? And I'm like, oh, that's terrible. What does that mean? It's just diluting. It's another thing that's diluting the word sorry. So the ultimate lesson there too is teaching my daughter, let's not apologize unless we really, really mean it as well. Instead of teaching her, okay, I want you to go apologize to that little boy that, when she's 5 or something. It doesn't mean anything because she's not actually sorry for what she did because she doesn't even realize what she did. So really making sure that the attachment and the sincerity of the apology matches what actually happened. Just seems like the most important alignment.
I have a question for you. So where do you feel you land on that now yourself? When you say, I'm sorry, which is really almost this form of acknowledgement, is like a genuine, like, oh, I'm really sorry about that thing. I guess what I'm hearing in you is that there's like the sorry that happens like, oh, I don't know, like I bumped your elbow walking down the street versus I know you asked me to do this thing and I totally forgot and it ruined your day.
Yeah, I think the small ones are less important as long as there's some kind of acknowledgement of, excuse me, or whatever. Those are definitely less important, although the acknowledgement still matters to me. Oh, I forgot to do that. Bummer. I still think it's important when it's something big to come and say, oh yeah, wow, I'm really sorry about that.
Yeah. So no, I agree when it's something big. I wasn't sure though, if you try and teaching your daughter about only do it when it's like, you really know what you've done and it's really genuine. If there is I guess my question is is sometimes like, is it always genuine when you're saying, I'm sorry right now throughout your day? Is it always like a genuine, I'm sorry? Or is it really just like a pardon, excuse me? And is that where part of the dilution of the word comes from?
Yeah, I guess I feel like they're both important, but they definitely have different weights. So ideally, we'd think of another word that was for smaller instances of bumping into someone on the street. And I'm not sure. Yeah, I'm not sure what the solution is for that. It's like a massive language-wide shift, which we can't probably start.
I've also learned that like the words that I say, like we just talked about, like, like when I'm apologizing, you need to be genuine, but also the intention versus the impact. Because sometimes you can say like, I'm sorry, but like, I didn't intend for you to feel this way, or I didn't intend for that to happen. I like to think my intentions for the vast majority of the time are good. And the impact of my actions still hurt somebody. And so recognizing that I'm not apologizing, like me justifying, oh, I didn't intend that, is not an excuse not to apologize, because if what I did impacted someone in a negative way, then that's really what the apology is based on, is on that impact.
Okay, that's fair. It sounds like you're thinking about intention and impact anytime you apologize.
More so that what I learned was I used to be in a way defensive if someone's like, oh, I'm hurt. And I'm like, I didn't mean to hurt you. And so then it's like, I didn't have to apologize because I didn't mean it. And then having to really learn, I didn't mean to hurt them, but they got hurt. Their experience, like the impact of what I did, they did get hurt. And I can apologize for the impact that they experienced, even if my intention wasn't to hurt them. That was a big process. I want them to feel my care and that I care about their experience, then I care about the impact that I had on them, even if I didn't intend that impact.
Yeah, it's not an excuse that you didn't intend it.
I feel like I hear that a lot in people just, in conversation when someone says, I'm sorry, but I didn't mean it. Like, I didn't intend that. That even if the apology is there, there's a defensiveness there as well, which negates the person who was hurt experience.
And what I hear is you saying, I'm sorry, but, right? Which leads us into the suggestion of a really good apology. And the first thing that comes to mind is like, oh no, an apology is not, I'm sorry, but it is, I'm sorry. Pause for a few moments. If you need to explain, then here's what happened. But I'm sorry, it almost needs a period. And that's a good reminder for me. Mm-hmm. Definitely. I think you have 4 steps.
Well, I do think as someone who is, I think both of us are not poker players. We're very expressive in our face, is that, and we're really talking about a big thing, right? Like, oh, I just found out that like I really messed up in some form, or someone was very impacted by something I did, is if possible for me to say the apology in person or on video so that the body language and the facial expressions, their ability to hear my words is amplified. So that's 1. Then 2 is being like specific about what I'm apologizing for. The whole point of an apology, which is part of like a repair conversation, is that you're trying to stay connected to someone that you care about. And so the point is that you're being specific, is that you want them to feel and understand that I understood what I did. The 3rd step is to express regret that I did wish it didn't happen. I did something. I'm sorry. I wish it hadn't happened. I can't take it back, but I can also wish that it hadn't happened.
Yeah, just a clear regret.
And the other pieces, there's a few more, is that it's also not helpful to say, I'm sorry, but this is what you did to set me off. If I'm apologizing, and again, this repair and connection is at the center of why I'm doing this, then keeping my apology focused on me is useful versus pointing out all the ways of why I did the thing.
I would say avoid mentioning their behavior in any way, shape, or form during the apology, even if their behavior didn't lead to your outburst. What I find typically is that we might say, I'm so sorry for doing this, but you do this all the time. Therefore justifying my behavior in doing it. So in general, we talk about our own behavior, not others, during an apology.
And the other thing is to acknowledge their feelings and not being defensive, right? Like, these are their feelings. They are allowed to have their feelings. They are responsible for their feelings.
Yeah, your feelings are valid. It's just a helpful phrase. You get to have your feelings.
And not interrupting them. Back to point number 1.
Which is really hard in the apology. What's the final piece?
Is to let go. Again, this is a repair conversation. If you've apologized and they've accepted the apology, can you let the energy of that moment go and be able to move on?
Yeah, that's a great 6 steps and 6 qualifiers. Maybe I'll get to all 6 before I die. No, but I actually feel like I have improved in a big way in this department. Just because when you take away the defensiveness, it's just so much more easier to apologize.
I also think that acknowledging that someone is going to have feelings, for me, it's the intention versus the impact. I did this and you're really upset about it. I really feel for you right now, and I'm sorry that you feel this way. Leave it at that instead of me trying to be like, excuse my behavior.
All right, what's next?
Reflections.
Right. Reflections. This just feels like a basic tenet of friendship now, or space holding, that I did not use probably prior to meeting you, or like say 3 to 5 years ago. And I think it's worth saying that you might need to ask in the beginning of an intimate or deep or poignant conversation, what do you need? Do you need help? Do you need heard, or do you need a hug? I also added hand job at the end because like it's an H.
Oh my God, so good. So good. Okay, I'm just going to say it now because I've never heard you say it. Okay, so do you need help? Do you need heard? Do you need a hug? Or do you need a hand job?
This is pretty clarifying, especially for my husband and I, when so much of my time I like want to vent and I just want him to be like, yeah, that's really sucks. I'm so sorry about that. Wow, it sounds really hard.
You just want to be heard.
Yes, I mainly want to be heard. You know, some people, me included, are like, I'm rushing to solve, right? I'm rushing for a solution. I'm offering help. And then some people don't want you to say anything. They just want a hug. I remember my husband telling me early on, he's like, you want to solve the problem. And what I want you to do is put an imaginary hand on my shoulder. That's all I want.
And I had a conversation recently with a friend. I'm very good at reflecting and then repeating back, this is what I heard you say. And afterwards, and she shared, she was like, I actually really want you to ask me questions. And so like she was actually looking for help. And it wasn't clear to me that she was looking for help. So that was actually, it was really beautiful because it deepened our friendship. Because now because she's someone that I process with a lot. And I'll say to her, okay, are you looking for reflection or are you looking for help? She now knows to also say, I'm looking for help in this. It's an awareness in both of us because her tendency was to ask questions. My tendency was to reflect. And so then it was like, oh, but if I want to be deeper in friendship with her, then I have to ask her questions. And she was like, and maybe you just want me to reflect sometimes. And she's always offering me help. And it was a really beautiful way for both of us to see each other more deeply, support each other more deeply, and then also to see ourselves and be like, I'm able to like more nuance with other people now. To like, I just didn't have the acronym. I was missing the acronym. Now I have it.
This reminds me of our last episode, or maybe our episodes 2 or 3 back, about asking for what we want. It's just like, no, I need questions. No, I need a hug. No, I need help. No, I just need to be heard right now.
If you know what you want, the other person then who probably wants to give you what you want. Right? Like most of us are wanting to be supportive of the other person. Right.
And so, and I've only learned from reflections from you mainly, and I do them all the time now on my client calls and with friends. And one of the things, I think 3 things you say to me is, I've seen a pattern. I noticed that a month ago you said this, and now you're saying this. You say that I hear that XYZ. And you also ask me permission sometimes, although you don't do that much anymore with me because I'm always going to say yes. But you say, would you like a reflection? And that also I find to be just a great permission getter. It presents the idea of the reflection first so people can swallow it and think, oh, okay, yeah. And so it sets it up a little bit more softly.
And I have had a friend who says no.
Right. I'm sure some people are not interested.
I will say this. I am proud of where I have gotten to with this. 5 years ago now, I remember the couch that I was sitting on when I had the nonviolent communication book and taking notes and had a little cheat sheet. And then my partner and I would have a conversation and we would practice. And it was like a 4-step process. And he'd be like, you missed step 2. And I'd be like, and then I could look at the book, look at my notes. And I'd be like, and it was so clunky and so hard and so clunky and so hard. And I would look at my notes and like, years. It wasn't like, oh, I just got it. It was years of trying to remember the order of how to do this well. I recognize that the partnership that I was in, like, I don't think I'll ever meet anyone who has the same standard of me. So I got to like start at the highest, hardest level. And now everything gets to be easier.
So this all comes back to communication. And when I'm communicating and when I'm listening, my first instinct is to connect, to create a connection with the other. This is something I feel like that was planted in me very deep early on, watching my mom talk to other people. Find a connection and go with it. Do we know the same people? Do we go to the same school?
What do we have in common?
Yes. What connects us? Where's our common thread? And it's served me very well in life for sure. And at the same time, my first experience with listening without needing to connect, just listening, just receiving, which was almost a foreign idea to me. I felt like I was always receiving, but I was always then trying to connect. And so I did this at a meditation center that we used to go to. And we would sit in these little couples, called dyads, and said, okay, you're going to listen and she's going to talk and you're just going to receive. You're not going to say anything back. You're not going to respond, nothing, just receive. And it was so challenging. I cannot not nod. I would always at least nod. Like no one can stop me from nodding. I'm not making a sound, but it's really hard for me not to even nod. I think partly because I also enjoy it when someone smiles and nods when I'm talking. So to me, this feels like true listening and practicing true listening.
There's a program, some of the brave hearts might know about this. It's called reevaluation counseling. It's also, I think, like a peer-to-peer counseling where it's a framework that's out there. Betty Martin of the Wheel of Consent has been doing it for 30 years. I have another friend that I met at ISTA who told me about it. One person talks for half an hour and the other person listens. And then the other person talks for half an hour and the other person listens. And the expectation is that there is no crosstalk or communication. The reason why it's called counseling is because there is so much healing for the person who's talking just to talk and not be responded to. In a way, it's like the external processing of sorts is how I see it. But they have someone who's not just listening. There's a skill to the listening deeper than what we're talking about here, but of a nurturing listening, an attentive listening, like a comforting, but the quality of the listening is part of why the person feels
comfortable continuing for half an hour. Some kind of nonverbals you must be meaning.
I haven't done it, but I'm really drawn to it and I'm thinking of like looking into it. But it's the idea of what we're talking about here in these dyads is just that it's not just about, oh, I just want to hear myself talk for half an hour. It's when I'm talking and someone's listening and I get to just express whatever it is that I'm feeling. My friend talks about this, like he went through a breakup. He talked about his own mental health. He did this every day, I think for a couple of months. And that's how he navigated like the depression and the state that he was in. Because he just got to like release his feelings. So he could talk about whatever he wanted, right? He could cry for the 30 minutes, like all of stuff, but he had someone caring, listening on the other side. And it doesn't have to be someone you know. So my understanding is that it's just like, it's a really like beautiful and simple, but maybe not easy practice that really serves mental health.
Yeah, that sounds awesome. Definitely curious. So I think you talked also about good listening includes waiting and pausing and staying silent beyond their apparent finish.
Yeah. So what we were talking about is especially talking to men. So one of the teachers that I've had is Alison Armstrong. She has several books. One of them is called The Queen's Code. And she really focuses on the perspective of the masculine form of communication. Her like mission is to help women understand the masculine. And one of the things she says in the book is a man is often thinking and will take a long time, like up to like 2 minutes to think before responding because he's single focused. So he's asked a question. So he's thinking about the answer and is now, and I don't know, maybe more men are also internal processors. But so he's thinking about the answer. For me to just wait and to wait and to wait and to wait until he actually answers. Whereas the way that I would normally do it, and you and I would do it, is if you didn't answer right away, I would try to ask the question a different way. And I remember my partner being like, you've asked the question 3 times. I just need to let me give you the answer. Her book helped me really see that the silence, if I could just sit in the silence, I would get the answer that I wanted. But because it wasn't coming as fast as I wanted it, I was almost like bulldozing.
Yeah, so I'm just going to put up a little flag of defense for you and I or anyone else who is waiting for a man to answer. more than 5 or 10 minutes. Like, hello, it's okay to say, you know what, I need a minute. I need another minute to think about this. It's not hard to give a fucking update. Yes, when I'm waiting 5 or 10 minutes, I don't know if he's lost himself in some other myriad thing in his head, or if he's upset about what I said and then he isn't responding because of that, or maybe he's thinking that he left the fucking oven on. I don't know. And so to me, a stream of communication, a little update after 3 minutes of silence is warranted. That's the thing. I mean, it could be a nonverbal facial expression, but my husband and I have been through this for years. It's very challenging, and we have learned, and he is also like, can't get the words out, really trying, can't get the words out. And so we have really worked with each other and like, great, you can take as long as you want, but you got to let me know that you're working on it. I just think that's very fair.
It sounds like you're in your situation when you're saying like 5 or 10 minutes, just out of curiosity, like, are you sitting at the table, you ask a question, and then it's just the two of you talking, and then he stops talking for 5 or 10 minutes and just doesn't respond?
Right. And that's what happens. Usually we're in bed, but like, yeah, it could be anywhere. He doesn't do it nearly as much anymore because we've worked on it so much. And, you know, it's fine to wait and if he needs time, but he knows too that like, I don't want to put him in a particular bucket, but like, I think sometimes the more you think about it and then you get in your head and then it actually just starts to unravel. Not for everybody, but I think we don't have as much of the issue anymore. Also, maybe he's less afraid to tell me things.
Because it's interesting. And I asked where it was because I was like, oh, okay. So in bed, I guess suppose like he could just fall asleep at some point, right? Without responding, it would be even an option, is what I'm hearing, right? So like, I guess, so when I was talking about this, I think she says like 1 or 2 minutes, but I don't know, maybe it goes longer than that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying, and that, yeah, especially if they were to like start doing something else, then that feels like a sign of
no, yeah, and that's not happening. Yeah,
okay,
it's clear. Yeah, it's just a longer time to wait that's needing the update. But I think overall our point is that you just have to wait longer than you think. You think you're waiting 60 seconds and you're actually waiting 15 seconds. 2 minutes feels like a long time when you're sitting in silence with someone in potentially a heated discussion.
But it will serve.
It does serve. And I think that's your point. So going into space holding, I feel like this is just a new verb. Just like, oh, can I hold space for you today? Oh, I had to hold space for someone. And I think it's important to name, because I remember you tossing it around a lot before I started using it. Oh, I actually just ended up holding space for her tonight. We actually ended up holding space for them. And how would you define holding space?
So I just called her friend the other day and I said this, I said, I have an issue. Do you have availability to hold space for me? And she said, yes. So then I just explained everything. And then she said, what are you looking for? Mm-hmm. Are you looking for reflection or are you looking for help? And so I said, I was looking for help.
Yeah. So, and I think that defines it in that it is clearly about one person working something out, the other person helping them.
Helping, or I could have just said I just need a reflection, or I just need a hug.
Sure, but the one person is in service and the other person is in receiving.
Yes.
That's maybe better words, would you say? Okay. Yeah. So, I mean, I'm just wanting to define that. That's something that we toss around a lot as well, and not everyone's familiar with it. It really is all about the other person if you are holding space for someone. And yeah, and I don't think everybody knows that they need held for them until they dive in.
Exactly. Because what you can also end up doing is suddenly they'll be like, oh my God, this is what happened, and like going into it. And if you haven't asked for permission, then the other person can feel stuck. They can feel trapped. They may not have capacity. And I think that one of the key parts of space holding is asking the consent and then honoring the boundaries, meaning, do you have a capacity for space hold? And then to also say, no, I don't, is really important in order for, I think, both people to feel like they're accomplishing what they had hoped to accomplish.
Yeah. And I think that boundary can come in the form of, look, I have 10 minutes, or you know what? No, I'm really stressed today about something else. And so I can't hold space for you right now. Can we talk tomorrow? Mm-hmm. So really, that's a great way to practice your boundaries.
And I've also had where I have like launched into something and then the person's like has gotten upset because then they feel like they're sort of being a bad friend, but they've also been taken advantage of.
Yeah. I think it's good. I don't know if I'm practicing this, but it's good to be a little more forgiving in that situation though, because, some people are like in a meltdown phase and they're not conscious or self-aware enough to be like, hi, can you hold space to me? Oh my God, this just happened to me. I get that. Okay, let's talk about avoiding the mundane. This is like one of my favorite new topics. It's really true because it just feels so pervasive in our society. So what we're talking about here is, and let me just caveat this. There's nothing wrong with talking about this, and there's nothing wrong with venting when you need to vent about the shit that's going on in your day. But I'm talking about external processing of general anxiety, traffic, healthcare, flight delays, administrative bullshit, being on hold with your Wi-Fi provider, how long you waited for the plumber to show up. All of these things that so many people go through on a daily basis. And maybe because I'm realizing that time is precious and I only have a certain amount of time with a friend or with my partner or with my daughter.
Or being alive on this planet.
Or being alive on this planet. Sure. Life is short. That I just don't want to waste too much time on that shit. And yet so many of us do, right? We sort of get on the phone and talk about all of that crap. And not only are we venting about it, but we're venting about it as though it's profound. I think that's the funniest bit. Like, you are not going to believe what happened to me. Really? You don't think I'm going to believe it? Because it happened last week. Like, that just doesn't make sense. So, and I'm making fun of myself here. Everyone does this to an extent, although some people less than others. So I think my point is that we need to stop wasting our time, wasting our breath with this shit.
My embarrassing story about this, it was many years ago. Not to say I stopped doing it after that point, but this is a story that still stands out. Is I remember being in the car with my friend Jeannie and her husband Howard, and we were having a very serious and profound conversation about toe hair. And I don't know how long it went on for. It could have been 5 minutes. It could have been 15. Could have been 30. And at some point, Howard was like, stop. Because he was in the car. He couldn't escape it. And he's like, it's fucking toe hair. Like, there's nothing else that needs to be said about it. And to this day, laugh and smile when I think about that. And it's degree of inane expression and energy that goes to things that, in your case that you're saying, that are mundane. So one of the ways around this, which we've both started doing.
Yeah, I want to say something first though about what you just said. And that just a little nuance here is that, yes, it's inane bullshit, but you and Jeannie were having a good time talking about it. So fuck Howard. I mean, he was in the car, so I know he was just annoyed with the noise. But if two people want to talk about two things and bitch about it, great. I'm saying great to that. But I would say if that's taking away from like you and Jeannie, okay, you only have an hour together, don't talk about toe hair for 15 minutes because you need to catch up on more important things. But sometimes, to my point about venting, yeah, if I just want to sit and vent about something with someone and we're both doing it and we're both fired up and we both want to bitch to each other, super. Mm-hmm. Nothing wrong with that to me. So just like little difference there.
I see what you're saying. And I can appreciate like the story and how it played out for me, and why it was useful. But yeah, I can really feel in my system like the satisfaction of times of like being in sync with someone else, right, talking about whatever it is that we're talking about, mundane or not. Exactly. If we're in sync.
Exactly. But poor Howard, he was started the toe hair talk.
So how do you avoid that? Right? How do you avoid the mundane? If it's something that you're like, I'm trying to get away from that. I'm trying to get away from small talk and things that don't matter. And yet I have to go to an event and talk to people. What do I do about that? And so there's a couple of questions that I've used over the years. Just one is like, what book are you reading? Something like, it doesn't have to be like, what's the weather like today? It's fall. It could be like, what's the book you're reading right now?
Right. Love it.
Another one is, what feels alive for you right now?
I've been trying that one out a lot, and it definitely throws people. Yeah. They don't know how to answer mostly. Yeah. But I think it's a good starter instead of how are you?
Yes. Another question is, what's new since I last saw you, or who have you become since I last saw you?
It's assuming they've become someone new. It also brings to mind it's a post I did ages ago, a year or two ago on LinkedIn about how most people, when you ask them how they're doing, how's it going, they're like, oh, so stressed, so busy. You know, it's kind of this badge of busy or this badge of suffering that we just all wear. And that's like what we have to say. Most often now when I am at the checkout at the clerk, you know, at the grocery store, they're like, how are you doing? I'm like, fantastic. I just say that every time because I just don't want to say fine, or I don't want to talk about the weather. I don't want to talk about I'm okay. And sometimes I'm saying in a sarcastic way, and sometimes I'm saying in a genuine way. So it's handy. I have to credit my friend Mitch, who I met in the Peace Corps, because every time you would see him, you would ask him how he was. He'd be like, fantastic. So anyway, that's not, you don't have to choose a word like that, but can we just stop with the, oh, yeah, I'm trying to do this. Can we just find something else to say about life? There's something about, it's almost like people are afraid to be happy.
Yeah, it's really significant, especially about the word busy, that it's a badge of honor in our culture for sure. And it's one that I'm aware of too, that I've really made a point of adding spaciousness into my life. So now if I say the word busy, that also means that I'm not doing something. Like I'm not staying with my intention of being spacious. But I have this like deeper recognition of if all we can say is that we're busy, then we're really missing something profound about life, right? Because that means that there's nothing in there that you can like, here's like the noise of all the words. Well, what of the busy things are you doing intentionally? Which one do you really care about? And I am someone who 100% badge of honor about being busy, having my day be the most productive thing. Like that, like brought me so much joy. And it's very new within the past year, within the past few months. It feels like I'm constantly like refining it because the habit of saying, how are you? Oh, I'm busy, and answering that way. It's a really hard habit to break.
And this leads us into the felt sense versus the story, which is something I'm doing a lot more of. And really, it's an old pattern that I'm trying to correct. When I see someone I haven't seen, maybe in 2 weeks or maybe in 6 months, instead of giving them a play-by-play of my life, which really is just, that's like giving them a movie of your life.
Or it's like the table of contents. It's just like, here's this like list, agenda.
Right. And it's basically a bulleted list. And what I really want to do is say, here's how I'm feeling right now. I'm feeling loss. I'm feeling elation. I want to bring it to emotions, and I want to bring it to my challenges. And then some of those happenings will creep in. You know, we went on vacation. We took a trip. My sister had a baby, whatever. Like, but instead of really giving that play by play. And I think this is what I see so commonly with, I don't know what it is about, is it baby boomers that I'm talking about? Without naming any names or actual relatives I have, but they're telling a story and they are spending 30 seconds saying, you know, was that a Tuesday or Wednesday? I just can't remember. No, it was Tuesday because we always have piano lessons on Tuesday and I always go to the dentist. And they're literally like giving me the unimportant details of the entire story. And I'm sure I've done this as well. And we just don't need to do that. It just doesn't feel like poignant communication, I guess is my point.
And that, I feel like, brings us back full circle to the beginning of our podcast about just because you're talking a lot doesn't mean you're a good communicator. And I feel like that's what I did, you know, I used to do, which was like, oh, I want to share all of the details, relevant or not.
Yes, exactly. Because I love to share the details, and sharing irrelevant details sucks. Yes. Because nobody cares. So our final bit here is about authentic relating. It seems like these are just good examples for all the things we just talked about. Yes. Instead of talking about your healthcare issues. Yeah. Do you want to read some of those that you use?
So let me just say, these sentence stems. There's actually a whole like description of what authentic relating is, which I'm not going to go into, but it feels relevant that I don't have the definition. So if you're curious, like this is a way to relate to others, and really communication. This whole podcast is, we're talking about it because relating to others is one of the most satisfying things we have in this lifetime. And all of us do it in some form or another, whether it's the clerk, whether it's a partner, whether it's a child, whether it's a parent. It's almost impossible to go through this world without relating to others. So how can you deepen those relationships? And so the authentic relating, it's a modality that has different games is probably the wrong term, but just different things that you can do to enhance your skill. at relating. And they are communication based. And so one of the games is it's called sentence stems. And this is how to get more meaningful conversations going. So one of them is, the status of my heart is, as a child, I was. You can count on me for. My first impression of you was.
My favorite part of my body is.
A spiritually intuitive experience I have had was.
What I really get about you is.
So they have experience stems, they have sentence stems. So there's just different things. So there's a lot out there on communication. So we're going to recap what we covered today, and then I'm going to talk about the resources that we have. So we've talked about interrupting and not interrupting. We've talked about apologies and reflections.
We talked about introverts and extroverts. We talked about our early family, childhood communication experiences.
Talked about true listening, space holding,
and structure of a good apology, avoiding the mundane,
the felt sense versus the story,
true listening, space holding.
So lots of things. Communication is a wide, vast, and deep topic. So some of the books that I have read that I highly recommend, I've mentioned in the podcast. Susan Cain's Quiet, The Power of Introverts in a World That Won't Stop Talking. Alison Armstrong's The Queen Code. The book on nonviolent communication. That particular book is also a website, and there's a lot of free resources on that site as well. And then authentic relating as a term, there's also books and workshops on that.
So try one of these tools, go for one of those resources, authentically relate, apologize differently, reflect, stop at the mundane, just take them one at a time, see if it makes any difference to you. Check out Instagram, call us, or contact us at any time. We love you, Bravehearts.
Love you. Thanks for listening.
Do you need permission to be human? You got it. Listen, subscribe, and review on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Learn more about us at permissiontobehuman.live.